Have you ever wondered why some people seem to have invisible fortresses around their hearts, keeping others at arm's length even when they desperately crave connection? The truth about how avoidant walls were built lies not in a single moment of betrayal or abandonment, but in 1,000 tiny paper cuts that taught someone that safety meant solitude. These walls don't appear overnight like concrete barriers. Instead, they grow slowly, brick by brick, formed from experiences that whispered the same dangerous lie, depending on others, leads to pain. Understanding this process matters more than most people realize. When someone builds these emotional walls, they're not choosing to be difficult or cold. They're following an ancient blueprint written by a brain that learned to prioritize survival over connection. The person behind these walls often doesn't even realize they exist, much like how fish don't notice the water they swim in. What makes this even more fascinating is how the mind plays tricks during this wall-building process, using cognitive shortcuts that seem helpful but actually trap people in cycles of isolation. This video will reveal exactly how these walls form, why they feel so necessary to those who build them, and what actually drives the construction process from the inside out. If you want to better understand someone's attachment style, see the link in the description to one of the most popular books on attachment theory. Picture a 12-year-old who discovers their mother reading their diary, not out of concern, but out of curiosity. The child doesn't explode in anger or tears. Instead, they quietly move the diary to a new hiding spot and make a mental note. Private thoughts aren't safe to share. Fast forward 2 years, and the same child excitedly tells their father about a crush at school, only to have Dad tease them about it at dinner in front of visiting relatives. Again, no dramatic reaction. Just another brick added to a wall that's slowly taking shape. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. This wasn't happening to someone who lived in a chaotic or abusive home. This child had parents who loved them, provided for them, and genuinely cared about their well-being. The wall building wasn't a response to obvious trauma. It was happening in response to what psychologists call little t traumas. Small moments where emotional needs went unmet or where vulnerability led to discomfort. These parents weren't villains in some dramatic story. They were ordinary people doing their best, not realizing that their child's brain was learning a crucial lesson. Emotional safety requires emotional distance. What makes this story even more compelling is how the child's brain was actually trying to help. Each time vulnerability led to discomfort, their unconscious mind filed away the experience as important data. The brain's reasoning was quite logical. If sharing feelings leads to exposure or discomfort, then keeping feelings private prevents future pain. This wasn't dysfunction, this was adaptation. The child was becoming an expert at emotional self-reliance, not because they were broken, but because they were smart. Their brain was solving a problem it perceived in their environment. Years later, this same person might find themselves in relationships that mirror the dynamic of Joe Goldberg from the Netflix series You. Not the stalking behavior, but the pattern of wanting intense connection while simultaneously maintaining control and distance. They might identify with characters like Blair Waldorf from Gossip Girl, who expertly manages her image and emotions while keeping her deepest vulnerabilities carefully guarded. Now let's talk about what actually drives this wall-building process, because understanding the mechanics changes everything. The first thing to recognize is that these walls aren't built consciously. Nobody wakes up and decides to become avoidant. Instead, the brain uses something called confirmation bias to reinforce the safety of emotional distance. Once the unconscious mind decides that independence equals safety, it starts looking for evidence to support this belief while ignoring evidence that contradicts it. When someone with these walls has a positive experience with vulnerability, their brain might dismiss it as an exception rather than evidence that connection can be safe. When they have a negative experience, their brain files it as proof that the walls are necessary. This isn't stupidity or stubbornness. This is how all human brains work. People see what they expect to see, and they expect to see what they've learned to look for. The second key factor is something psychologists call the availability heuristic. This means that the brain gives extra weight to experiences that are easy to remember, especially emotional ones. If someone's most vivid memories of vulnerability involve discomfort or disappointment, those memories become the template for what vulnerability means. The brain doesn't carefully analyze statistical probabilities about relationship outcomes. It relies on the emotional memories that are most accessible, and for wall builders, those tend to be memories that reinforce the importance of self-protection. Here's what's particularly clever about how these walls function. They create their own evidence. When someone keeps others at emotional distance, they often end up in relationships with people who are comfortable with that distance. This means they rarely experience what it feels like to be truly seen and accepted for who they are. The walls prevent the very experiences that might prove they're unnecessary. Understanding this process also means recognizing that wall builders often gravitate toward partners who confirm their existing beliefs about relationships. They might find themselves drawn to people like Emily Cooper from Emily in Paris, charming and engaging on the surface, but ultimately keeping things relatively light and manageable. Or they might be attracted to the emotional unavailability of someone like Chuck Bass from Gossip Girl, where the relationship feels intense but never requires complete vulnerability. The most important thing to understand about these walls is that they're not character flaws. They're solutions that worked in specific circumstances. A child who learned that emotional self-reliance prevented disappointment grew into an adult who's exceptionally good at emotional self-reliance. The problem isn't the skill itself. The problem is when this skill becomes the only tool someone has for navigating relationships. Breaking down these walls doesn't happen through dramatic confrontations or emotional breakthroughs. It happens through small, consistent experiences that slowly teach the brain a new lesson. Connection can be safe. This requires patience, understanding, and recognition that the walls were built for good reasons. They can only be taken down when they're no longer needed, not when someone else decides they shouldn't exist. The journey of understanding how avoidant walls were built reveals something beautiful about human resilience and adaptation. These walls represent a child's wisdom, a brain's problem-solving ability, and a heart's determination to stay safe. Recognizing this changes how we see these patterns in ourselves and others. Instead of viewing emotional walls as obstacles to overcome, we can see them as protective structures that served an important purpose. The goal isn't to tear them down violently, but to slowly, carefully, and with great respect help the person behind them discover that they might not need such thick barriers anymore. Real change happens when safety is found in connection, not just in solitude.
Thank you for watching. If you want to learn how to better understand avoidance, relationships, and psychological biases, then subscribe to our channel, because you deserve beautiful relationships.